Where do your dreams come from? Are you actively suppressing the call to do something more? Today's guest had a terrible educational experience growing up, bouncing from school to school, eagerly awaiting the day he was done. Despite his lousy experience with education growing up, he always felt the pull to teach and to educate. After teaching and being a principal for over a decade, he started a podcast that now has over 350 episodes. He is an author, he's a public speaker, and he works with educators from all over to help achieve his big dream, which is to positively impact the lives of 100 million kids. Welcome to the Socks and Soul Podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Ditto. Let's go. Welcome in studio, my guest today, Jethro Jones. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I'm just curious what kind of comments people make about your name.
All over the place, man. There are people who talk about Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah, right.
Naturally. There are people who talk about Jethro Tull. And to be honest, I actually never heard Jethro Tull music until I was 18. And I was on a scouting trip and or something like that, or a youth event or something. And somebody said, Jethro Tull, man, I love Jethro Tull. And I was like, well, I've never heard it. And so they put on Bungle in the Jungle. And that was the first time I had ever heard Jethro Tull. And then now what's actually kind of nice is Jethro from NCIS. Uh-huh. He has become more popular and he's a cool guy. So that's a good positive association. Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies isn't so much. And there's a very rare occasion where somebody understands where my name really came from, which is from the Bible. Moses' father-in-law was named Jethro, but here's the kicker. He also went by Rule. So he was, my dad's name was Rule. My dad always wanted Junior, but he knew that the name Rule was an awful name to have grown up. And
he had firsthand experience.
He sure did. Yeah. So he said, I want a Junior, but I don't want to name him Rule because that would be cruel and unusual. And so he named me Jethro. So it's kind of this cool backdoor Junior kind of situation that you have to be a really big Bible nerd to even get that, because nobody knows that Jethro and Rule were the same person. Few people know that Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. But a lot of time people think that I'm, in a band or I have a superhero name or something like that. So
that was me.
Yep, that was you like, today. Yep.
Jethro Jones. Who are you really?
Yeah.
Are you Spider-Man or Ant-Man or
put
what
my
are
mask
you, man?
on? And, yeah.
I knew Jethro was a biblical name, but if you asked me who he was, I couldn't tell you. I'm not that good of a biblical scholar.
Yeah.
But I did know it was a biblical name.
Yeah, most people aren't, but most people say, oh yeah, that does sound like it could be a biblical name.
Yeah.
So
unique name, Jethro.
Yeah, cool. I like it. With a last name like Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel bad for my brothers George and Nathan, who have totally normal names. You look up on Google who's George Jones, and there's millions of them. But for Jethro Jones, there's not many. I've actually met two Jethros in my life. One was older than me, and one was in Alaska just a couple years ago, and he was 5. So that's all I've gotten so far.
That's it. That's your following.
Yep.
Your club is pretty small.
It is pretty small.
So I'm really interested in your story. One of the things that I have been doing over the last 12 years is talking to people that have started businesses, following their dreams. And this podcast is all about people who take an idea and do something with it. Last week I interviewed Sandy Zimmerman, who's
amazing,
whose motto is dream big and give your dreams a chance to grow. And I feel like you are the perfect segue from her podcast, because you have a big dream and you have made some big decisions in the last 10 years to make that dream happen. And we'll get to that. What I want to start out with, though, is you spent years as a middle school principal. Mm-hmm. I want to hear about your journey to education, why you chose to be that, and then from there where you've gone and where we're going from there. So why did you choose that you wanted to be middle school principal, or what did you choose, I guess?
Yeah. So that I think that's a really interesting story. I went to 5 elementary schools when I was a kid. And
were you a military family?
No. My dad we just moved a lot, and so some of those were in the same city, but we just moved to a different part of the city. So I went to these 5 different elementary schools. I ended up skipping 7th grade, and then I went to 3 different high schools. And so, I had all these different experiences of what school was like. And what I learned was that I was just a cog in a machine. And I gotta tell you, that just felt awful. I did not like that at all.
Probably more so because you never really got to create really deep relationships.
That's right. Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh yeah, I had your older brothers, in this school. You were just like the transfer from whatever school, and then pop, you were in the wheel.
Yep, exactly. So as I became older, and especially when I moved here to Spokane halfway through my junior year, I figured out that it was a game, and I just needed to play the game and get through it. And once I realized that, I actually enjoyed school a lot more because I stopped caring about what it felt like and recognized this is just an awful thing that I need to get through. And so I
actually thought that this is an awful thing that I just need to get through.
In Sacramento, where I lived before here, that was halfway through my freshman year to halfway through my junior year. And I hated that school. I hated going to there every single day and just wanted to be done with it, But I knew that I had to go because you have to get a high school education and you have to go to college and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't realize that there were a lot of different opportunities out there. So going to that school, I felt like I was treated poorly and unfairly. That's a little woe is me kind of attitude, which isn't healthy either, but that's how I felt at that time. And so when I moved here to Spokane, I was like, okay, I just need to get these credits done, get through these classes. And I was able to take a independent study class for Washington history because you have to have it to graduate in Washington.
So is this is your late high school years when you moved here? Okay.
Yep. And so I go through that course and I realized that I could do the course way faster than what I would typically be able to do it in. And that was my first taste of what it was like to do school differently. So, moving on, I go to college and didn't get into college because my grades were bad at first. Had a saintly woman named Barbara Crump who wrote a letter saying, this guy needs to go to school and he needs to get into this college. And she totally made it so I could get in because they rejected me. And then she wrote the letter and then they accepted me.
She had some kind of pull with the school or what?
No, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Maybe I should ask her.
Yes.
Since I'm back in Spokane again.
Who did you know on the board?
Exactly. Yep. So she made it possible for me to go to college by writing that letter of recommendation, which was really good. Met my wife there, majored in English because I didn't want to be in education because I thought that being in education wouldn't be satisfying to me. However, I felt this pull to be in education, and I've felt that my whole entire life.
When you felt that pull even when you were going through school and it was a terrible experience?
Yep, I felt like I need to be a teacher.
Fascinating.
So there are 2 parts to that. Number one, it was I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't realize that there were so many other jobs. So what I love is helping people learn things or watching people grow and develop is what that pull really is. I thought I needed to do that by being a teacher. And I didn't realize that you could help people grow and develop in so many different ways, in so many different professions. I thought it was just that. So I graduated in English because writing has always come pretty naturally to me. And
You got your bachelor's degree in English?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. Felt pretty good about that. When we graduated in December, and my wife said, we really need to move down to Utah. We were at BYU, Idaho. Uh-huh. And she said, we need to move down to Utah. And I was like, what are you talking about? There is like nothing there. We should go someplace else. I should try to find a job in writing. I had a friend who was a technical writer, thought I might be able to get on with his company.
So even though you felt this pull towards education, you still were following a career in writing.
Right. Yep.
And you were feeling the pull at that time.
Oh, yes. I have always felt the pull.
Okay.
And I don't know what that really means or why that is, but I've always felt like I needed to be in education. So we went down there and she's like, you should apply to BYU and get into their master's program. and for educational leadership. And I was like, I can't even do that because I don't have any experience teaching. Why would I get into that master's program if I'm not even going into education? But my wife, she like can predict the future or something. And so she said that we need to do that. And she really pushed me to do it. And I didn't want to. I took the GRE, that was really all I needed to do to finish the application. And we were in the middle of moving and I took it and then we moved the next day. And somehow I got into the program, and which I think is just another one of those things where that's where I needed to be. And when you go in the direction that God's pulling you, then you'll get those doors opened. So
this is amazing to me.
I know.
I mean, most people spend years thinking about what they want to get their master's in, or a long time. And even though that voice was telling you, or that feeling was telling you to do this, you were still actively not doing it.
Yeah.
Yet your wife recognized that was what you should have been doing as well.
Yep.
And so because of that, you reluctantly, it sounds like, decided, fine, I'll go do this.
I was basically like, fine, I will apply to appease you, my dear wife, and I'm not going to get in because...
And this will be done.
And then it'll be done, and, I
can go do technical writing for whoever.
Right, and which, wasn't even a plan, to be honest. I was like, I could do this. There was also some flirtation with this idea of making computers with my brother in Sacramento, but I knew I didn't want to go back to Sacramento, so that was a fleeting thought and wouldn't really ever work out. I knew that, but I kind of wanted to. So we graduate in December. Schools for BYU started in the summer, and so basically in May or June. May is when I would need to report there, and so I didn't really have a purpose. And my wife was like, "Why don't you go start substitute teaching? You could do that. You've got a bachelor's degree." So I said, okay, I need money. I don't have a real job yet, so
I need
I'll
money.
do that.
I'm about to start a master's degree in educational leadership, and I've never taught, and I need money. So
exactly.
This makes sense to me.
Yeah. So I did that, and it was fascinating because I learned while I was teaching that I really did love it, and it was a lot of fun, and I loved it enough that I could do it. But I also knew that getting to administration was really my goal. So being a teacher, you're not going to make a ton of money. I knew I wanted my wife to stay home. So I knew that I would need to do something more to be able to provide for the family. So I was substitute teaching, and then I started applying for teaching jobs. And in Utah, at the time, they had this thing called alternative routes to licensure, where if you got a degree, you could take education classes once you had a job.
Alternative routes to licensure.
Yep. So that's how you become a certified teacher if you didn't graduate in education.
Gotcha.
So I did that and applied for the program, and they said, sure, you can, if you get a job, which is the big thing, then you can do it. And I ended up going for an interview in August at Midvale Middle School. And I was sitting there in the interview saying, what am I doing? Like, I've already started these educational leadership courses, and I probably should be a teacher first, before I get that degree. But at the same time, like, I still don't want to do it, but I know that that's the step I need to take because I got into the program. I need to have this teaching experience. So I ended up getting a job, and I got hired like a week before school started. And so there was like very little time to prepare, and it was like a fire hose. And the mentor teacher or the principal literally walked me into the classroom and said, those are your books over there, and this is your classroom, and you're teaching 9th grade English, 7th grade honors English, and 7th grade English. And so those are the books. And that was pretty much it. That was what my training was.
Good luck, Jethro.
Yeah.
You might want to invoke your superhero here.
Exactly. Yeah. So then I started teaching, and I realized that I really enjoyed it, and didn't know what I was doing, was taking these educational courses about philosophy and lesson planning and things like that. And everything just felt backwards to me. And it took me many years to figure out why it felt backwards. And the reason why it felt backwards is because we don't learn in real life how we learn in school. In real life, we have a problem, and we say, I need to learn how to do this to solve this problem. And then we do what we need to do to learn how to do that, and we fix the problem, and then we move on. So, my lawnmower is broken, and I don't have the money to have somebody repair it. So I need to go figure out how a lawnmower works and take it apart and try to figure out what's broken and then put it back together. And that's how we learn in real life. And school says, okay, you need to repair a lawnmower. And the first thing you ask is, why do I need to repair a lawnmower? Because the teacher said so. And so all these courses that I was taking were saying, here's how you do education. And it just felt wrong the whole time I was taking it. So I didn't teach that way. And I tried to, but it didn't work and it was miserable. And I hated it when I did it that way. When I did it the other way, so for example, in that first job, they were going to get rid of some old eMac computers. And I'd never used a Mac before at that point. And they were going to get rid of them. And I said, can I have those for my classroom? And they're like, yeah, sure. We'll just get rid of them next year. So they bring them down to my classroom, and I've got to figure out how to get them set up, get them on the network, do all this stuff. I had to figure all that out myself. But then I had my kids start blogging in 7th and 9th grade. And these were kids in Midvale. They were not interested in school at all. Most of them, some of them were, but they didn't like school. They didn't want to be there. But once I had them start blogging, these kids who would get in trouble in all their other classes would come to my class and they would like do what they needed to do. And so what was the problem we were trying to solve? These kids wanted to express themselves. And so they expressed themselves a lot through misbehavior in the school. And in my class, they expressed themselves through writing on a blog that people could read. And so when they got comments and support from people all around the world, they were pretty excited that somebody was actually reading what they were writing. And this is what I think is really important. The purpose of school isn't necessarily to teach all these academic standards. It's to help kids find what's in them that matters, that somebody else cares about. When they see that somebody else cares about what they're doing, they change their behavior, they change their attitude. All the negative stereotypes that we have about kids, they lose all those negative things really fast when they're engaged in something that actually matters to them. And so I saw that my first year teaching and said, that's what I need to focus on, because I'm happier, the kids are happier, we're all learning, and those kids were writing things that nobody ever thought they could write. And we're supposed to teach them how to write these 5-paragraph essays, which if you experience that in school or anybody experienced that in school, you know that that's a total pain. Nobody likes to write that way. But what I started doing is bringing in actual writing from people they admired in media and other places. So a lot of these kids were minorities, and so we did a lot of rap songs, or as I called it, poetry.
Awesome.
And we brought that in, and we listened to songs that numerous times people said you shouldn't be listening to that in school. But I knew the kids were already listening to it. So, instead of them, hiding that from me, I said, why don't you just play that out loud? And let's share that with everybody, because we could all then learn how to write a good song. And so we wrote rap songs, we wrote other kind of songs, we wrote poetry, we wrote, narrative essays, we wrote stories about their lives and all those things. And then we published them, and they had the opportunity to do something that was real. And what my biggest regret from that is that I don't still have all that stuff, because we put it on a different site that I didn't have control over. And it was a student blogging software to make sure it was safe. And now I really am bummed that I don't have those kids' writings anymore. So
I'll
pause there.
This is amazing to me, because here you go stepping into teaching as, I'm going to teach English, right? My job is to teach these kids how to write, how to use grammar correctly. And what you discovered in your first year of teaching was that I can change the behavior of kids that are having a hard time using this really otherwise, for most kids, a pretty boring and frustrating subject of English and writing by showing them an applicable part of this to their life.
Yeah.
This is why it's good to be a good writer. And what you don't even realize is all of this stuff that you're consuming, it comes from people who know how to write.
Right.
And so they were able to connect these dots, and you were able to change behavior in the process of teaching kids English. Right. That seems like an impossible task to me.
I know. And they weren't perfect, and I still had problems, and I still had kids misbehave. I even had a kid wait in my classroom to beat me up after school one day, and that kid was more experienced and bigger than me, and he definitely would have destroyed me if I didn't figure out a way to talk myself out of that situation, which, again, that is the power of language, is that I was able to de-escalate him, make it so that he wasn't upset with me anymore. And he still hated me and probably still wanted to beat me up, but chose not to. And I'm really grateful for that, because that would have been an awful experience to be involved in. But, I was dealing with kids who had some really challenging situations that were causing them to act that way. And
so is it during this time that you started to connect what you had been told in your mind your whole life about teaching? I mean, I imagine this was kind of a pretty strong aha moment for you in your professional development, where you're going, this is what it all meant. This is what I'm supposed to be doing,
Yeah. So what the aha moment was that I didn't have to teach how I was taught, and I needed to teach how the kids needed me to teach. So it wasn't about, in the next year. So at that first school, we had reduction in enrollment. So I was forced out of the school. It's called reduction in force, just means there's not enough kids, so you don't have a job, because I was the newest hire.
Sure.
And so I got transferred to another school, and that other school was completely different. Very different students, very different social, economic status and all that kind of stuff. And they had different interests and desires. But the thing that was the same was that when I could find a way to make things meaningful to them, then they would change their behavior again. So one of the things that we did at that school was, it was during the 2008 election when Barack Obama became president. We didn't know it at the time, but we did this campaign trail collaboration wiki with schools all over the world, in France, in Australia, in Kansas and Oregon, and all over the place. And there were a bunch of other schools involved as well. And we basically, our goal was to document and track the campaign as it was happening. And I mean, if you think back to 2008, what a different world we lived in compared to what's happening this year. And it was fascinating to see these kids who didn't typically care about national politics really become interested. And it was their job to document everything and to write about the different candidates and to understand what they were really standing for. And these were seventh graders. Like, you don't think a seventh grader can go read a news article and come back with this cogent summary of what it is. But that is exactly what they did. And, very different group of kids. We had a lot more technology there. The iPod Touch was introduced, so we incorporated that into what we were doing. And it was just really cool to see how those kids really got excited about learning when that happened. And so from there, I went to a district level position coaching schools, and then became an assistant principal at elementary school. Again, very different environment and totally different focuses. Back in Midville, back with a lower socioeconomic status group of kids. And we were really focused on data and like making sure that every kid met the standards. And again, it was a great experience, but it also taught me that kids are not data, that kids do not care about the data. The only people who care about standards in education are the adults. Kids just want to be kids, right. and they should be. And so we were able to do some cool things there, but it was there that I really realized, okay, I can't keep going down this path. I need to be able to do something different. I need to be able to make education turn so that it's kids driving it instead of the adults. And up to that point, even though I had tried, our systems had really been all about the kids the adults driving education and the kids just going along with it. And what I didn't realize until much later, that when a kid has a learning objective, like most teachers are taught to do, and they put the learning objective on the board and they say, okay, today we're going to learn how to keep it simple, 2 + 2. What happens when a kid learns how to do 2 + 2 and that it equals 4? Are they going to keep going and say, well, I wonder what 3 + 3 is? They're certainly not, because the objective is this, and they can check it off and be done. And what I learned is that if you don't tell the kids the objective and you allow them to drive their own learning, they go way above and beyond. And I had that thought in my mind, but couldn't articulate it yet. But I knew what we were doing was limiting the kids' growth. And so we had the opportunity, my wife and I, to go to Alaska to be a principal up there. And
So did you finish your educational leadership?
Oh, yes,
then?
yeah.
So you were teaching and doing that at the same time?
yeah, teaching, doing that at the same time.
And that was what, a
three
year
year.
program?
Yep.
Okay.
So did that at the same time and then finished that. 2 year. It was 2 year.
Okay.
Finished that and then did the district job. And then I was able to get an assistant principal position once I had my credential.
Okay. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So then you go to Alaska.
Yeah. So then we go to Alaska. And the great thing about Alaska was that it's kind of the Wild West in a lot of ways. And so
What do you want to do? Go ahead.
Yep. And there's a lot of that happens, which is a benefit for the kind of education that I wanted to do. So what we started doing at the first school was we started having teachers lead these different kinds of, we call them tutorials, which is where every 2 weeks we would change and kids would go to a different tutorial and they would learn something different from their teacher. And the reason we set it up that way is that we wanted kids to be able to like choose and be exposed to all these different things. Because then we could find what they really liked. And once we could find what they really liked, they could then start planning their day around that piece instead of around like a class schedule.
This is way different philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, this is radical stuff.
It sure is.
When we talk about institutionalized educational systems, it's
Yeah.
just like, here's your work plan, go execute your work plan.
Exactly.
And you were like, I mean, you were way out there on this stuff.
Yeah, way out there in the traditional system.
Right.
But like Maria Montessori, who just yesterday, as we're recording this, celebrated her 150th birthday. She's dead, so she's not still around. But she advocated for this kind of education all the way back in the early 1900s. And so we've gone away from that, but her philosophy is follow the child. The child does what they want to do, and you as the adult, the way I interpret this is you follow the kid around and note what standards and accomplishments they're achieving. That is definitely a different way of doing education, but it works, and that's actually how we learn naturally. So that way makes a lot of sense in that kids actually love to learn, but so many kids hate school.
Yeah.
And so this is a great opportunity for them to experience this different way of doing it. And that's what we did in Alaska. And it was amazing. The things that kids were able to learn and explore were just incredible. And then we were at that school for 3 years. And then in Fairbanks, Alaska, they had this big focus on personalized learning. And I thought, boy, that is exactly what I've been trying to do for all these years, is personalized learning for kids. And so I went up to that district to be a principal of a middle school there. And that's when the doors really came off. And we were able to create this program that we called Synergy, where kids could, for an hour and 40 minutes twice a week, they could devise their own project. And the expectation I gave them was, you need to do something to make the world a better place, but you get to define all those terms. So you define what world means, you define what better means, you define what something means, but you got to do something. And so we gave them this big block of unstructured time, which in education is like a huge no-no,
right?
Because we don't like unstructured time in education.
Right, that's when spitballs start getting made. And
exactly.
Stuff.
Right. So we try to limit that as much as possible, but this was 2 hours twice a week, basically, that they got to decide what they were going to do.
Wow.
Which was just amazing. We had kids who wanted to create a social network so that they could have a social network without bullying. Middle school kids, right?
Awesome.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
What middle school kid thinks of that? But these kids did. We had kids who taught other kids how to do cheer, volleyball, and soccer.
So I saw that video. You sent me a link to a video, and you're if you can imagine, you're in a middle school gym, and you've got sixth graders teaching first and second graders, it looked like, young kids, all of these different skills. And there were no teachers around them.
No.
There were no adults.
No.
And I mean, I just think about my own daughters and how much they would have loved an environment like that.
Right.
And those little kids adored, those bigger kids.
And here's the amazing thing is those girls who were doing that program, I'm going to take a little time to talk about their story because it is so amazing. So they had, that year, we could not find any PE teachers. And so we started the school year with substitute teachers for PE. And these girls just happened to get assigned to that teacher as their mentor. And And then that teacher, the substitute teacher, couldn't stay for the whole year because she didn't have a credential. So she had to stop after 20 days because of the rules that we had in the system. But she was amazing and was so inspirational for those girls. So then we had a bunch of different substitutes that came in, finally got a long-term sub, like 2 or 3 months into the year, who could stay for the rest of the year. Now, what was amazing is these girls had to figure out how to convince another principal to let them pull the kids out of school and bring them over to our school.
Oh, so they weren't even in the same building.
No, they weren't. They had to, and they were going to do it in winter in Fairbanks, Alaska, which means they got to put on all their snow gear, walk across the field that joined the school, so they were at least next door, and then bring them over, do the thing, put the clothes back on, go back over. They had to supervise them the whole time. They had to get permission. They had to do permission slips for the kids to be able to participate. They had to convince the other principal, like I said, which, when you start thinking about all the standards that kids are supposed to learn in middle school, and even they reached up into high school standards as well. So I did a little assessment of what they learned. I found 32 different standards that they accomplished just by doing this project.
That's so cool. Man.
So
you must have been just bursting at the seams.
I tell you, that's why I made that video. And in the video, which you can put a link on the
I'll
podcast
put it in the
too.
Show notes.
I got choked up and I had to stop talking because it was exactly what I had envisioned. All the way back when I was 18, 19 years old and feeling the pull and resisting it. And I said, this is what education can be. This is these girls doing amazing things. And here's the kicker. They said, this is really great, but we're only getting girls, and boys need to learn how to do these things too. So we want to bring boys on our team to help out. And I knew the boys that would apply for this team to be part of it. And so these girls had to figure out how to make a job description, post a job description, interview, hire, and they did. And they also had to learn how to take my advice and ignore it, because I said, I know who's going to apply and you should not do this because these boys will ruin what you've created.
Sure.
And they said, no, we feel really strongly that we need to do this, so we're going to do it anyway. And I said, okay, well, this is student driven, so I'm going to let you do it, even though I totally disagree.
It was a very much sink or swim kind of moment.
So sure enough, they hired these boys, and then they had to fire them just 2 weeks later because they just wanted to come and play.
Standard achieved.
Exactly, right?
Like, great, let's go play basketball in the gym for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Sweet.
So is there a standard in our K-12 education system that says know how to fire someone from a job? There sure isn't.
Not a chance.
Nope, but these girls figured out how to do it, and they did it with compassion and kindness and grace. And those boys left and said, we just weren't a good fit. Like somebody getting fired saying, I just wasn't a good fit. Like they weren't mad. They weren't offended. We just weren't a good fit. And so they moved on with their life.
I love that.
I mean, can you imagine having a kid come out of 7th grade and have a skill like that?
No.
It's just incredible.
It is incredible.
And you can't, like, if we would have tried to teach them how to do that, it never would have gotten there because we couldn't have created a situation where they would hire someone and then fire them.
Right.
Like those kinds of things, just, it's not possible. And that was the time where I said, okay, this is what I need to do with my life. And this is what I need to devote my life to doing, is creating learning experiences like this. And it took me all those years to figure that out, Kelly.
But that's awesome. I mean, but at that point you realized, or at least you decided, that being a middle school principal wasn't enough to fulfill your dream, because now the big dream starts to formulate, right?
Right. Yep.
I mean, and so it was at that point or somewhere near then that you started all of this other stuff that you have created along the way. Yeah.
So that feeling of it not being enough to fill my dream really started back in 2012. I was listening to podcasts and about being a better school leader, and then my favorite podcast stopped broadcasting, and I was like, man, there's this void in my life, and I need something else. So I started a podcast myself that took me about a year to finally do it. I'm a slow learner, obviously, as you can tell.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. So it took me a year to finally start it. And so I did. And I was so nervous that nobody would say yes to me, that the first person that did say yes, one, I offered her a gift card if she said yes. And two, I also split her interview into 2 different interviews because I wanted to release every week, and I was afraid that nobody would say yes and come on the podcast. And so now I'm at the point where I have, I've got 3 months of shows already lined up to go. And I'm thinking about switching to 2 days a week instead of 1 day a week, because there's so many stories out there to tell. And I love doing the interviews. I love talking to people and finding out their story and what they're doing in their school. That's amazing. Okay. So I realized now that I have, lots of stories that are out there to tell, lots of schools who are doing amazing things. And the more I can share their stories, the better it is for everybody, because they can see what's possible in education. So the podcast started because I wasn't satisfied with my own growth as a school leader. I felt like I needed to grow faster and be better and go quicker. And so I started the podcast, and now I feel like I'm learning in dog years. And so because what I do on my podcast is I have a problem and I find someone who has the answer to that problem.
Yeah.
And then they teach me, and that's how we learn, right?
Yes.
Going back to the beginning. And so I want that to be for every single student in the country for sure, but definitely in the whole world as well, because it's so much more meaningful and you remember it forever. And I was reading this book about homeschooling just a few days ago, and the author talked about this idea that she learned the word siphon because she was getting a waterbed in her room, and they needed to empty out the water from that and fill it up in the other room so they could move it. And so her dad taught her what siphon was. My learning about siphon involved gas and a gas tank.
Yes. I was the image in my mind. I was like, like motorcycle gas tanks.
Exactly. Yep. So what you realize, though, is that, I remember when I first learned what a siphon was, just like she remembered when she learned what a siphon was. And those kinds of learning experiences can happen all the time and all over the place. So things that I've learned in being a school leader have happened through that. And I think that applies to anything,
Mm-hmm.
In the business side of what I do, the podcast and the coaching principles and speaking and that kind of stuff, that also has happened when I've had a problem and need to know how to deal with it. And so I've found the people who can help me learn how to do it. And then I record our conversations and I share it with others, because those conversations help me be a better leader. But then I think they can also help others who are going through similar things at that same time.
Man, what a great proactive solution, to a problem that you identified, a shortcoming in your educational process, instead of just being stagnant and thinking, hey, you know what? I've got this thing. I'm a good principal. Look at this great program that I have. You were thirsty. You were hungry for more, and you still had all of these problems that you wanted to address and find solutions to. And because your podcast that you'd been listening to went away, that font of information and educational, prosperity, if you will, you're like, fine, I'll create my own. I've got all these problems. I'll find these people and I'll put a podcast out, and it's been a huge success.
Right. I mean, it's been going on for 7 years now.
It's incredible.
And I love doing it. Even to this day, yesterday I recorded 5 interview for the podcast.
Yeah.
And after every one, I was like, gosh, that might have been my best one yet. And, it's so amazing, because learning really is fun.
Yeah.
And I am so frustrated that in school, we make learning not fun. We make learning boring. We make learning rote. We make it about memorization. And that's not really what it's about. You have to memorize things when you're forced to, when you don't want to. But memorization comes naturally when you care about it.
Yeah.
So for example, my kids are loving that show Avatar that has been, I think it's off the air, and they just discovered it. And my daughter recited the opening sequence to that TV show from memory without support. Nobody told her she had to do that. But because she watched it numerous times and cares about it, she did it. I've also got this cool video of her doing that with the Suave Man commercial. Who's a Suave Man? A Suave Man is every man. Yeah. Are they sponsoring this podcast? Because they probably should.
That's right.
So,
You're welcome to.
Yeah, exactly. So they, having that, recognizing that my own kids will memorize things when they matter to them, we don't need to have memorized. When we learn something in a natural way, we remember it pretty much forever, and we can retrieve it just like that because we learned it in a way that makes sense, because we learned it in the natural way of learning things.
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, so you got this long-running podcast, and then at some point you start doing coaching and training and public speaking. Were these all added to your repertoire just naturally, or were you actively seeking out these opportunities? I'm really interested in how that happened.
Yeah, it was mostly natural, and there were things that I started doing where I was like, one, I need to make some money from this, because podcasting doesn't take a ton of money, but it does still take money, especially if you're a nerd like me and you want to have fancy gear, right?
Yeah. I'm the principal of that class.
So it does take money. So I was like, I need to get like some return on the investment. So what I started doing, I actually started both of these in the same year. And I kind of have this philosophy that I'm going to do something and see if I get a return on it, not necessarily financially, but that at this point, that was the point. But what do I get from doing that? So with the podcast, I get to talk to cool people, and I get to learn what I need to learn in the moment. And that is totally a return. So, that's great. So then in 2016, I started coaching principals, because I thought, I've interviewed all these people. I should move from an interviewer to an expert and start sharing what I've learned. So I started mastermind groups with people, and started doing that with school principals, and that has been really great as well. So we meet once a week and we talk about the challenges they're facing, and we really do this whole learning just in time kind of approach. What do you have a problem with? Let's figure it out and give you a solution, because that's how we all learn. And so we can just, keep repeating that mantra all throughout.
So the coaching is part of the education process, which is what you're teaching as a whole.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
Super cool.
And so, you can go to a conference and you can learn a bunch of stuff in this short amount of time, but then the real value is when you're getting the learning right when you need it. So, you're not going to a conference the week before Christmas, but you can come to the mastermind the week before Christmas and deal with that problem that you're facing the week before Christmas and get a solution, and then know how to solve that problem in the future. So instead of doing this, compressed conference type thing, we do the mastermind, which is constant all throughout the year. Every week you're going and learning more. And it's been really successful. And I love doing that also, because people come with these really sometimes intense issues, people behaving badly or not being able to reach a certain student or whatever it is. And we're able to help each other, and they get the best advice they can from everybody, and then they get to go make their own decision and see how that works out.
And they come back and report to the group, I'm guessing.
Yep.
You get to hear the follow up and.
Yep. We set goals about what they need to do. Sometimes those are relating to those issues. Sometimes they're relating to other things, but then we have that accountability there as well. So we support each other, but then we also hold each other accountable. And it's a really good way to do it, because there's no politics. There's no like, I need to look better than somebody else, because we're all there to support each other. Yeah. Nobody's there to like look better than anybody else. Mm-hmm. And that's really powerful. Now, the same year that I started that, I started doing a leadership summit for school leaders. And so we would meet or we would record a bunch of interviews and then publish them online and let people come, and they would be able to pay to have access to those. So I did that for 3 years, and then 2019 just didn't work out and it just wasn't going to happen. And then 2020, this year, I did reopening workshops for reopening schools during the coronavirus. And, each of these little things that I've done have really been scratching my own itch. I saw, some summits being done outside of education. I thought, man, what if we could do a summit in education that nobody had to travel to? And remember, I'm living in Alaska at the time.
Right.
So traveling down to lower 48 is a big deal.
Yeah.
And, we just didn't do it all the time. And, it takes a whole day to travel pretty much anywhere down here. So it was definitely something that, I wanted to have more professional development myself, especially in the summer. Wanted to go to conferences, but couldn't always do that. So I made my own conference. And that's been a really fun thing to do as well.
Man, that's so cool. I love this concept of, creating, finding and creating your own solutions. I just think that is a great theme, in your educational career.
Well, and what I learned is that that's called entrepreneurship in the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's why you're here.
Right. So I didn't know that at the time, but I see now that entrepreneurship and education can be so closely connected. And
Totally.
There are a lot of schools and districts and programs out there that try to blend the two. And this year with the coronavirus is by far the best time ever to be involved in that stuff, because nothing is how it was before. Mm-hmm. So if you're a teacher or an educator, you've got the perfect opportunity. If you're a business person, you've got another great opportunity to go mentor a young person and help them see how they can learn things by solving problems.
Oh, and I have seen that in spades as I've talked to entrepreneurs over the last, 6-8 months. I'll go into businesses that I think that, oh man, this guy has got to be dying on the vine. Mm-hmm. And I'll go in and he has completely retooled, what he was doing before. And he's thriving.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's really, really been fascinating watching the entrepreneurial mind function in a time like this.
Yeah.
So now, to me, one of the most amazing parts of your story is things finally came to a head where you had to pick, I'm going to continue to be a principal, or I'm going to go be Jethro Jones, the superhero educational teacher guy. And you made a huge, huge change in your life. And I want to understand how you came to that decision, and then what's the dream now moving forward?
Yeah. So about a year ago now, September 2019, my wife and I've been doing the podcast, and that takes time. Been coaching, that takes time. Doing occasional speaking opportunities, and I realized, I can make an impact in education, and I can affect those 400 kids that are in my school, or I can start taking the things that I know work and sharing them with others and giving them permission, because that's really what educators need, is permission to do these things. Even though they make so much sense and they definitely work, they still need permission, because that's not how we've taught them to do it. Mm-hmm. So I can go help educators do that. And so we decided, in September 2019 that was going to be my last year as a principal, and that we would go out on my own and do consulting. I didn't know coronavirus was going to hit, and that, that kind of put a wrench in things. So,
yeah.
But, I really felt strongly that I had to make a choice. I either had to go full in and do the principal thing all the way and stop the podcast, stop the coaching, stop all the other stuff, or I had to do the side hustle stuff, make it full time, because I was burning the candle at both ends and had been for a long time. And I just needed to pick one and do it. And I've really been afraid of leaving education, because education is a steady paycheck, right? And
great benefits, steady paycheck.
Yep, retirement, all that stuff. Yep. And there have been a lot of things that have held me back from doing that before, but it just felt like the right time. And looking back, it certainly doesn't look like the right time, but it did feel that way. And so, we made that decision in September. And, when you leave education, like it's not really socially acceptable to just leave in the middle of the year, for a myriad of reasons. You've got the kids you're supporting, the teachers you're supporting. And so we were able to stay on for that year and then leave. And it was a hard decision, because I love working on team. I love working with other people and having, seeing people grow. The librarian that we brought to Fairbanks was from Georgia, and the growth that she had in just a short time working with her, she was someone who was eager and ready to learn, and I put her in a lot of situations where she had to learn and figure things out. And to see the growth that she had and the impact that she had on students because of her own growth was just inspiring. And I love that aspect of that work. But I knew that I couldn't just keep on doing that and burn the candle at the other end. And so we needed to make that choice. And thankfully, my wife supported it and was advocating for it and said, we just need to do that. And I mean, for my wife who likes security to say that is a pretty big deal, I think.
It's good to have a cheerleader like that in your corner.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Because without that, I mean, I'd be full of self-doubt because I am already that imposter syndrome. How can I, do this because of whatever weaknesses I have? But we can rise up to the level that we have within us. Thinking about Sandy Zimmerman's interview from last time about how she, overcame way more than I've overcome.
Yeah.
And is on a much bigger stage than I am. And, that is impressive. And just being around people like that makes you think, well, maybe I could do my little thing over here also.
Yeah. Why not me?
Right.
Why not me?
Yeah.
I mean, here you are looking for this resource and it's not really readily out there. So why not create it?
Yeah.
Why not make it happen? And you've got these years, running your podcast and talking to people and the information that you have gathered and compiled and all of that. I find it to be such an inspiring move on your part, watching what you have done, quitting your 9 to 5, moving your family out of Alaska, presumably, in this area. So you're not only more accessible to the lower 48, but also around some family in this area.
That's true.
I mean, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me, sorry, go ahead.
So let me just address that piece real quick because I keep trying to tell my sister and brother-in-law how much they mean to me, and I can't ever do it. So part of moving here during all this that made it possible was that I knew that I'd have support from them. And, I appear like I'm self-confident, like I've got everything figured out, but I don't. And so being here, moving here, being close to them, they're the ones that let me live with them when I was in high school, when I was making a lot of bad decisions. I thought, man, if I can go anywhere and have support, it's going to be close to them. Yeah. And so, Andrew and Jason, I just want to say thank you because you guys have saved my life and I appreciate it.
That is awesome. That, we can pretend like we can fulfill dreams on our own, but when we're dealing with our own self-doubt, having people in our corner who relentlessly believe in us is critical.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is critical.
I don't even know if they believe in me, but they got my back, and I appreciate that.
They're like, well, we don't know if he's that great, but he thinks he is, so we'll just go with it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic. So tell me about your book. This is another big dream thing.
Yep. It sure is. And I actually, so the book's called School X, and if you want to get a copy of it, I would suggest getting it and giving it to your principal.
Today's a big day for the book, right?
Yeah. Today is the first day it's available on Amazon. So awesome. Anybody can go get that. And really it's taken all these things that we've talked about and giving principals a blueprint for how to do it in their own school. Because it seems daunting. It seems like it's impossible. How can I ever possibly start? And really it's about designing the education that you're giving to families around the people that are actually there.
Sure.
And the way we do it in education is not like that. And we do it in our own way. And the book really helps principals figure that out so that they can design it for the kids that are in front of them. And so we use the design thinking process of what's the problem that people are facing? How do we gain empathy for them? What is really causing the problem? And then how do we find a solution to that? And it doesn't have to be perfect, So you find any solution is an attempt to be better than what it was. And if that doesn't work, it's not a big deal. You just try something else.
You just move on to the next thing.
Exactly. So it's a really powerful way. The design thinking process is awesome and something that a lot of people in education are not familiar with. And so they don't know too much about it. But it is a way to really serve the people that are in front of you and to make your school adapted to those kids. And what's amazing is that every school is different and has different kids. And so no two schools can be alike. Even though we try, they really can't. And so depending on who you have in your building and what you're doing, you're going to have a different result. And so you can't just say like, here's the perfect plan that's going to work. Here's the perfect program. That just doesn't exist. You have to create that to really serve the people that are in front of you.
Oh, man, our journeys are totally unique. And the subset of people, when you put them together, their experiences as a group are totally unique.
Exactly.
So why wouldn't we create unique educational experiences to tailor the people that we are educating?
Well, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
It takes work and it's hard.
That's the why, I guess.
Yep. That is
like,
totally.
We should, because when you say it like that, it makes it super obvious.
Yeah.
However, that's the hard way.
Yeah. And it really is, it is harder. It is more difficult. But what you find is that when you are acting in a way that's really benefiting the lives of those who are directly impacted by it, it makes the hard part worth it. It makes it easier to do those things because you're seeing the results right away. And, when I was at the elementary school as an assistant principal, we were doing good things for kids and it was great. But when I was at the middle school in Fairbanks and we were really changing these kids' lives and letting these girls know how to fire someone when they're in 7th grade, and to do it in the right way where those people walked away saying, it's okay, it's not a big deal. That's a totally different objective. We're trying to get kids to meet test scores here. And in Fairbanks, we're trying to get kids to know how to interact with other people with grace and compassion and kindness. Those are two totally different objectives. But this objective, I'd go for that every single day because we need more of that in our world today.
Oh, just actual applicable life skills.
Yeah.
Things that they're going to face. How are we going to teach you to address these situations in a real life scenario? At work, at church, at home, all of these scenarios.
Yeah, exactly.
Jethro Jones, you are a podcaster, you are an educator, you are a public speaker, you are an author. That's pretty cool dream you're fulfilling.
Man, when you put it like that, that feels pretty good.
I think those of you that start with these dreams and you think them big and then you put your head down and just work at it and you poke your head up and you've got hundreds of podcasts that you've done. You've got a book that is, heading out to the world and, in your public speaking and your mastermind groups. What a great body of work you have amassed, and you've got a long ways to go.
Right. And I feel like I have a long ways to go. Like you say that like I've already arrived and I feel like I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I wanted to do this podcast with you is that I just left my job in June. So it's only been 3 months and it's been a good 3 months, but it's still brand new. It's the beginning of the road for me. And I know how far I can go. And how far it's possible to go, but I'm really excited for this journey ahead, even though, to be honest, it's a little nerve-wracking also.
You undoubtedly have more big dreams to fulfill, but at the bottom of your website, one of your website pages, there's something that says, it's my goal by the year 2027 to impact 100 million kids. That is an awesome, lofty goal. Sandy would be very proud of you for a goal like that.
Yeah, and really what that looks like is the way I came up with that number is if I were the Secretary of Education for the United States, my decisions would be able to impact about 75 million kids each year, right? And so I thought, if I don't really want that job because I think that would be awful, but if I could through my speaking and what I do make that kind of an impact and affect that many kids over the next now 7 years, then that would be a pretty awesome thing for me to be able to do. And so if you're listening to this and I've impacted you, and even if you're, not a teacher, but a parent and you have kids, you can go to jethrojones.com/impact and just put in how many kids I impacted. And that's a great way to keep track of that number. And what amazes me is that number it's at 129,000 last time I checked, maybe 124,000, something like that.
That's amazing.
But that's incredible.
Oh, that's amazing.
I never would have thought that would have happened.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's 100,000 kids at least that I've impacted through what I'm doing. And to read the stories that people submit when they do those surveys and put the number in, that's what I'm really getting is those stories of what the impact is for people. So that is pretty inspiring to me.
It's like fuel for your dream.
Right, exactly.
This is what is pushing this momentum. You're saying, okay, I'm accomplishing, I'm doing this. it's a tangible number that you can attach to what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so I actually do use it that way. I have I take a screenshot of it, and then I put it in my digital journal as with the tag social proof, and that's what I just do whenever I get something good. So then when I'm having a down day or feeling like things just aren't working, I can go look at that tag of social proof and see, okay, I am doing this, I am impacting people's lives, and whatever it is that's making me upset didn't work, but I can get back on the horse and do it.
That is awesome. What a great tool. What a great idea. I warned you when you were coming on this podcast that I was going to ask you about your sock philosophy.
Yep. Okay.
And so I see we might have a little bit of work to do here.
Yeah.
We got 2 white socks, and they mostly match.
Mostly.
They're if you can see them, they're white. They have stripes on them. The stripes are different colors on each sock.
Yep.
So
here's what I do. I mean, I have white socks and I have black socks. Black socks when I dress up, white socks when I don't, and I just grab whatever's there. So if they match, it doesn't matter because they're usually under shoes. And so I don't think too much about the crazy socks like what you have. Although there is a group of superintendents on Twitter who have superintendent socks and then take pictures of their crazy socks. So I've thought about that, but what's most important to me is the comfort of my socks.
Okay.
So if they're not comfortable,
Yep.
then they're no good. And I've had some crazy socks before, but they were too tight around the calf, or they were they made my feet sweat and then they stink, and that's no good.
That's no good.
So
Nope.
So for me, it's comfort first and foremost. If they match, they don't match, that doesn't matter too much to me. So that's my sock philosophy.
Okay, that's way better philosophy than I thought you were going to come up with.
Good.
That is very good. I do like that explanation. I was going to tell you, for those that are listening and not watching, I wore these socks. These are Cleveland Indian socks. This guy is their kind of secondary mascot. His name is Slider. And the reason I wore these socks today is because I went to middle school in Ohio.
Okay.
Part of middle school in Ohio, near Cleveland. And anyway, and my first Major League Baseball game was to the Cleveland Indians. I thought, you were a middle school principal. I thought I would wear the socks that for the team that I loved in middle school.
Awesome.
But now you're back to the Northwest. And so I thought it would be appropriate. I got a little gift for you here.
Well, look at that.
So you are, as you know, you spent some years here growing up, but you're in Seattle Seahawks country here in Washington State.
And Seattle Seahawks country is also Alaska.
Oh yes, that's right. That's a good point.
Yeah,
that's the closest team to them.
Seattle up there.
So these are a pair of Stance socks. These are Stance is one of my absolute favorite brands, and they're a little bit more flashy than your black and whites.
Okay.
But you can wear these on a day that is appropriate.
Excellent.
So
next time I'm on your podcast, I will wear these.
I like it. There you go.
And football is my favorite sport, so this is good as well.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
It was meant to be.
Yeah, thank you.
Jethro Jones, where else can we find you?
JethroJones.com is my website, and on Twitter, that's where I'm most active, just at Jethro Jones there. And then my podcast is Transformative Principal. But, if you're not a principal already, you may not love that. I think it's great because I interview awesome people who are doing cool things. But
but it's pretty specifically tailored to your educators and your administrators, principals and whatnot.
But share that with your school principal and say, I heard this awesome podcast and you got to check out all these. And there's over 350 episodes out there already. So
amazing.
Just there's a deep back catalog for sure.
Amazing. As a guy who is in his 7th episode, I look at that mountain and I think, dang, well done, brother. Well done.
Yep. You'll get there.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Jethro. Your story is amazing and inspiring, and undoubtedly you've affected the lives of some of our listeners out there. And we're excited to have you check in months or years or whenever to kind of see where you're at on your dream and your process.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You bet. All right, that wraps up this episode of the Socks and Soul podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. The Socks and Soul podcast is a production of Ditto Film Media. If you enjoy this content, be sure to give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Join the conversation on Facebook at Socks and Soul Podcast.